Hello, everyone. What is your biggest enemy in life? Before you answer, think carefully. Maybe you're thinking of your circumstances, your competitors, or a lack of resources. But in his shocking book, Ego is the Enemy, author Ryan Holiday tells us that your biggest enemy is you. Not ego in the psychological sense, but that unhealthy belief in our own importance, that arrogance and self-centered ambition that blinds you to reality. In this video, we're diving deep into this book to see how ego is your enemy at every stage of your life, when you're just starting out, when you reach success, and even when you face failure. Stay with me to discover how to tame this internal enemy and achieve real, sustainable success. Introduction: The Inner Citadel Under Siege. In his 2016 work, Ego is the Enemy, author Ryan Holiday presents a formidable thesis. The greatest impediment to a successful, meaningful, and resilient life is not external circumstance, but rather a powerful internal adversary, the ego. Drawing from his own experiences with early success as a marketing strategist and his subsequent fall from grace, Holiday posits that precisely the qualities that drive ambition, confidence, vision, and the belief in one's own potential also make one acutely vulnerable to the psyche's darker side. The book serves as a manual to identify, guard against, and subdue this internal opponent. It is critical to establish from the outset that Holiday's use of ego is not clinical or Freudian. He deliberately sets aside formal psychological discourse to adopt a more colloquial, accessible definition. An unhealthy belief in our own importance, arrogance, self-centered ambition that blinds you to reality. In his book, Holiday's stated aim is therefore not to inspire in the conventional sense of puffing up the reader's self-esteem. On the contrary, the book's objective is to make the reader think less of yourself, so that one may be liberated to accomplish the world-changing work you've set out to achieve. To build his case, Holiday employs a dual methodology. First, he weaves a tapestry of historical and contemporary anecdotes, using figures from military history, politics, business, and philosophy as illustrative case studies. Second, and more fundamentally, he grounds his arguments in the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, translating its tenets for a modern audience seeking practical guidance. These arguments are organized within a core tripartite structure that tracks the life cycle of any endeavor: aspire, success, and failure. This framing of ego as a single, unified enemy is both the book's primary strength and its most significant vulnerability. By consolidating a complex web of distinct psychological phenomena, pride, insecurity, entitlement, paranoia, the need for control, and the fear of others' judgment, into one monolithic adversary, Holiday creates a powerful and accessible narrative. The reader is presented with a clear target, a single inner demon to be vanquished. This simplification makes the book's lessons feel universal and highly marketable. However, this intellectual shortcut comes at the cost of nuance. Critics have argued that by using ego as a substitute for human vice in general, the book becomes meandering and its advice can feel like a series of disconnected platitudes. The tension between the book's narrative simplicity and its philosophical precision is a central theme in any critical analysis of its impact and value.
The Triptych of Human Endeavor, a Structural Analysis. The foundational architecture of Ego is the Enemy is a three-part framework that organizes human experience into a recurring cycle of aspire, success, and failure. This structure is not presented as a simple linear progression from start to finish, but as a dynamic and often unpredictable loop. One aspires until success is achieved. Success is maintained until failure intervenes, and failure compels a return to aspiration, hopefully with newfound wisdom. This framework is designed to be universally relevant, offering guidance to the reader regardless of their current position in life, be it a young person brimming with ambition, a leader at the pinnacle of their field, or an individual reeling from a devastating setback. The central argument embedded within this structure is that ego is the enemy every step along this way. In the aspirational phase, it impedes learning. In success, it blinds us to our faults and invites complacency. In failure, it magnifies every blow and makes recovery nearly impossible. Holliday's explicit goal is to provide a practical guide for navigating this cycle with specific virtues, to be humble in our aspirations, gracious in our success, and resilient in our failure. The structure itself implies a causal relationship between the stages. Unchecked ego during aspiration prevents success. Ego-fueled arrogance during success inevitably leads to failure. And an ego-driven response to failure prevents the humility required to aspire once more. While this tripartite structure is effective in its clarity and comprehensiveness, it also functions as a dramatic narrative arc that may not accurately reflect the lived reality of most individuals. The journey from aspire to success and then to a dramatic failure is a classic storytelling trope, lending the book a sense of high stakes and epic struggle. The historical examples chosen often reinforce this drama, focusing on figures who experience spectacular rises and calamitous falls, such as the business magnate Howard Hughes or the disgraced entrepreneur John DeLorean. This narrative framing is highly engaging and makes the book's lessons memorable. However, this emphasis on dramatic arcs risks distorting the more common, less spectacular nature of professional and personal life, which is often characterized by long plateaus, incremental progress, and minor setbacks, rather than heroic triumphs and tragic collapses. By casting the journey in such stark terms, the book may overemphasize the fall as an almost certain consequence of success, potentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where readers become overly anxious about success's corrupting influence. The framework is powerful for illustrating principles in their most extreme forms, but one must question whether this dramatic structure provides the most practical guidance for navigating the mundane, everyday challenges where ego is just as present, albeit in a less theatrical form. The triptych of human endeavor, a structural analysis. The foundational architecture of ego is the enemy is a three-part framework that organizes human experience into a recurring cycle of aspire, success, and failure. This structure is not presented as a simple linear progression from start to finish, but as a dynamic and often unpredictable loop. One aspires until success is achieved. Success is maintained until failure intervenes. And failure compels a return to aspiration, hopefully with newfound wisdom. This framework is designed to be universally relevant, offering guidance to the reader regardless of their current position in life, be it a young person brimming with ambition, a leader at the pinnacle of their field, or an individual reeling from a devastating setback. The central argument embedded within this structure is that ego is the enemy every step along this way. In the aspirational phase, it impedes learning. In success, it blinds us to our faults and invites complacency. In failure, it magnifies every blow and makes recovery nearly impossible. Holliday's explicit goal is to provide a practical guide for navigating this cycle with specific virtues, to be humble in our aspirations, gracious in our success, and resilient in our failure. The structure itself implies a causal relationship between the stages. Unchecked ego during aspiration prevents success. Ego-fueled arrogance during success inevitably leads to failure. And an ego-driven response to failure prevents the humility required to aspire once more. While this tripartite structure is effective in its clarity and comprehensiveness, it also functions as a dramatic narrative arc that may not accurately reflect the lived reality of most individuals. The journey from aspire to success and then to a dramatic failure is a classic storytelling trope, lending the book a sense of high stakes and epic struggle. The historical examples chosen often reinforce this drama, focusing on figures who experience spectacular rises and calamitous falls, such as the business magnate Howard Hughes or the disgraced entrepreneur John DeLorean. This narrative framing is highly engaging and makes the book's lessons memorable. However, this emphasis on dramatic arcs risks distorting the more common, less spectacular nature of professional and personal life, which is often characterized by long plateaus, incremental progress, and minor setbacks rather than heroic triumphs and tragic collapses. By casting the journey in such stark terms, the book may overemphasize the fall as an almost certain consequence of success, potentially creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where readers become overly anxious about success's corrupting influence. The framework is powerful for illustrating principles in their most extreme forms, but one must question whether this dramatic structure provides the most practical guidance for navigating the mundane, everyday challenges where ego is just as present, albeit in a less theatrical form.
Part 2. Analysis. The Perils of Arrival. Navigating the Intoxicating Heights of Success. The second part of the book addresses what Holliday considers the most perilous stage of the journey, success. Success is intoxicating. It provides the ego with precisely what it craves: external validation, praise, and a tangible sense of importance. This is the moment when the enemy within is at its strongest, whispering that the hard work is over, that you have arrived, and that you are no longer a student but a master. In this state, ego blinds individuals to their faults, fosters a dangerous complacency, and systematically sows the seeds of their future failure. Key arguments and concepts: the trinity of corruption, entitlement, control, and paranoia. Holliday argues that success, when filtered through an unchecked ego, inevitably breeds a toxic trinity of delusions: entitlement, control, and paranoia. Entitlement is the belief that success is not just earned, but is a reflection of inherent superiority, creating ridiculous expectations and the sense that one is owed more. Control is the obsessive need to micromanage every detail, born from a fear that any challenge to one's authority or methods will expose a weakness. This prevents delegation and overloads the successful individual. Paranoia is the conviction that others are threats, that rivals are out to get you, and that only you can be trusted. The story of aviator and film producer Howard Hughes serves as the book's primary cautionary tale, a vivid illustration of how immense talent and success can be utterly consumed by this descent into ego-driven isolation and madness. Always Stay a Student, Part 2. The imperative to remain a student does not diminish with success, it intensifies. The ego, now bloated with achievement, insists it knows everything. To sustain success, one must actively fight this impulse. Holliday presents Genghis Khan as a surprising but powerful positive example. Genghis Khan's stunning military victories were not just a product of his own genius, but of his relentless pragmatism and his capacity as a lifelong learner. He consistently absorbed and appropriated the best technologies, tactics, and innovations from every culture his empire conquered. This demonstrates that even at the height of power, humility and a willingness to learn from anyone, including defeated enemies, are essential for continued adaptation and growth. The professional, unlike the amateur, finds learning enjoyable and is not threatened by being challenged or even shown up. They embrace learning as an endless process. Don't tell yourself a story. Success creates a powerful temptation to craft a heroic narrative about one's journey. The ego wants to believe that everything unfolded according to a grand, premeditated plan, that success was an inevitable outcome of singular brilliance. Holiday warns that this storytelling is a dangerous delusion. It sanitizes the messy reality of the hard work, luck, and contributions of others that led to the achievement. Writing our own narrative turns our life into a caricature and disconnects us from the very real, practical steps that created success in the first place. To combat this, one must remain relentlessly focused on facts, not stories, and resist the urge to believe one's own hype. Manage yourself. As an individual becomes more successful, their role inevitably shifts from doing the work to making decisions about the work. This transition requires a new level of sobriety and self-awareness. It demands avoiding what business strategist Jim Collins calls the undisciplined pursuit of more, a state where ambition becomes untethered from purpose. It also means guarding against the disease of me, a term popularized by legendary basketball coach Pat Riley, which describes the state where individual glory and statistics become more important than the team's collective mission. Managing oneself in success involves staying connected to the bigger picture, knowing what is truly important, and maintaining the discipline and humility that made success possible in the first place.
Part 3. Analysis. The crucible of failure, forging resilience from setback. The final section of the triptych confronts failure, which Holiday portrays as a crucible that can either forge strength or shatter a person completely. If success is an intoxicating poison for the ego, failure is a direct and devastating blow. The ego's reaction to failure is to magnify the pain, assign blame to everyone else, wallow in self-pity, and ultimately prevent the learning and resilience required for recovery. This section provides a strategic manual for navigating setbacks by subduing the ego's destructive impulses. Key arguments and concepts: alive time or dead time. A central and highly practical concept in this section is the distinction between alive time and dead time, an idea Holiday borrows from his mentor, author Robert Greene. Any setback, whether a minor obstacle or a catastrophic failure, creates a break in the action, a period of waiting or inactivity. Dead time is when this period is spent passively, despairing, or waiting for circumstances to change on their own. Alive time, in contrast, is when this forced pause is actively used for learning, reflection, planning, and skill development. The choice between the two determines whether a setback becomes a permanent grave or a fertile ground for future growth. Holiday uses the example of Malcolm X, who transformed his years in prison from dead time into a period of intense self-education as a prime illustration of this principle. The effort is enough. This argument is perhaps the most deeply Stoic principle in the entire book. Holiday contends that we have only minimal control over the outcomes of our efforts or the rewards the world chooses to bestow upon us. What we have near total control over, however, is our effort and our adherence to our principles. The ego is obsessed with results and external validation. To find resilience in failure, one must detach self-worth from these external factors and instead find pride and satisfaction in the knowledge that the effort was sufficient, that one did their absolute best to become the best that they are capable of becoming. Legendary basketball coach John Wooden is cited for his definition of success: peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. This mindset inoculates one against the despair of unfavorable outcomes. Maintain your own scorecard. Society provides a public scoreboard of success and failure, promotions, sales figures, public opinion, awards. The ego is fixated on this external scoreboard. Holliday argues that great and resilient individuals maintain their own internal scorecard. They judge themselves not against others or against conventional metrics, but against their own potential and their own principles, which are often far more demanding than any external standard. From this perspective, the only real failure is to abandon one's principles or to give less than one's best effort. This internal locus of evaluation allows figures like former Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham to make unpopular but principled decisions that appeared as failures on the external scoreboard, but were crucial victories on her internal one. No pity, only purpose. The ego's natural reaction to a setback is to take it as a personal affront, a narcissistic injury, and to descend into self-pity. Holliday argues that what is needed in failure is not pity, but purpose, poise, and patience. Humble and strong individuals do not see failure as a permanent indictment of their value as human beings. They see it as a transitory state. They avoid complaint and self-immolation, instead meeting the challenge with stoic resilience. When success begins to slip away, the correct response is not to grip and claw so hard that you shatter it, but to recognize that you must work yourself back to the aspirational phase, returning to first principles and best practices with humility and renewed purpose.
The Stoic bedrock and historical foundations. Holliday's argument is not built in a vacuum. It stands firmly on two pillars: the philosophical tradition of Stoicism and a methodological reliance on historical narrative. Understanding these foundations is essential to a critical deconstruction of the book's message, its appeal, and its limitations. Echoes of the Stoa, instrumentalizing ancient philosophy. Ego is the enemy is, at its core, a work of applied Stoicism. Holliday acts as a translator, taking the often dense concepts of ancient philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, and rendering them into practical, actionable advice for a 21st century audience. The book is replete with Stoic ideas, reframed for modern challenges. The dichotomy of control. The Stoic division of the world into things we can control, our thoughts, judgments, actions, and things we cannot, external events, other people's opinions, is the bedrock of the book's advice on failure. The mantra, "The effort is enough," is a direct application of this principle, urging a focus on our own actions rather than on outcomes we cannot command. Euthymia and purpose. Seneca's concept of euthymia, a sense of knowing one's own path and staying on it without distraction, is reframed by Holliday as purpose. This provides the intellectual basis for his argument to prioritize a steady, internal-driven purpose over fleeting, external-driven passion. Apathy and discipline. The Stoic ideal of apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, is more accurately a state of being free from irrational and disturbing passions. Holliday channels this concept into his advocacy for discipline, deliberation, and reason over the blind emotion of passion. Objective perception. The Stoic practice of seeing events objectively, without adding emotional judgments, what Marcus Aurelius called abiding by first appearances, is echoed in Holliday's call to get out of your own head and see reality as it is, not as our ego wishes it to be. The book's popularization of these ideas reveals a central paradox. It masterfully adapts Stoic techniques for the pursuit of modern, external success, building a company, leading a team, achieving greatness in a chosen field. This is a fundamentally non-Stoic application of the philosophy. For the classical Stoics, the goal was not external achievement, which they classified as an indifferent, but the cultivation of inner virtue, arete, as the sole and ultimate good. The tools of Stoicism were meant to achieve ataraxia, or tranquility, and a virtuous character, with the understanding that one could be a complete success as a human being, even while failing in the eyes of the world. Holliday's work therefore represents a strategic instrumentalization of Stoicism. He effectively decouples the how of Stoic practice from the why of its original philosophical aim. This explains both the immense appeal and the criticisms it sometimes receives from philosophical purists. It makes a rigorous, often ascetic philosophy practical and useful for a culture deeply invested in ambition and achievement. In doing so, however, it risks stripping the philosophy of its ultimate telos, leading to interpretations that see it as Stoicism light or mischaracterize it as simply being anti-emotion.
The use of history, a critical analysis of evidence. Holliday's primary mode of argumentation is the case study, using historical and contemporary figures to personify the virtues of humility and the vices of ego. This narrative approach makes the book highly engaging and its lessons concrete. He presents positive role models like the humble General George Marshall, the duty-bound William Tecumseh Sherman, and the resilient Jackie Robinson, alongside cautionary tales of ego-driven collapse like Howard Hughes, John DeLorean, and the ancient Persian king Xerxes. While this method is effective for illustration, it is also the book's greatest analytical vulnerability. The selection and interpretation of these historical anecdotes can appear selective, tailored to fit the book's thesis. For instance, Holliday cites New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick as a model of humility and process orientation, an example that is compelling when focused on his early career, but becomes more debatable when considering his entire tenure and public persona. Similarly, the praise for Genghis Khan's learning system strategically omits the profound brutality of his conquests. This opens the door to criticism that the author is projecting ego, or a lack thereof, onto historical figures, creating narratives that serve his point but may not be historically complete. The following table provides a structured analysis of how some key figures are employed. Critical reception and contemporary relevance. The reception of ego is the enemy has been largely polarized, reflecting the very tension between its accessible narrative and its intellectual rigor. It has been lauded by many as a transformative work, while being dismissed by others as superficial. An examination of this reception, combined with an application of its core thesis to modern figures, reveals the book's enduring, if contested, relevance. Praise and acclaim. For a significant portion of its audience, the book is thought-provoking, highly practical, and even life-changing. Readers frequently praise its raw authenticity and its ability to provide a much-needed antidote to a culture that glorifies shameless self-promotion and social media posturing. The use of historical anecdotes is often cited as a major strength, making abstract philosophical concepts feel tangible, memorable, and applicable. Many readers report a profound personal connection to the message, finding it a liberating call to focus on substantive work and internal standards, rather than the exhausting performance of the imaginary audience, the feeling that one's every move is being watched and judged. The book's clear structure and concise, story-driven chapters make it an engaging and accessible entry point into philosophical self-examination. Criticisms and counterarguments. Despite its popularity, the book has faced significant criticism from several angles. Intellectual critiques. A primary objection is the vague and all-encompassing definition of ego. Critics argue that by using the term as a catch-all for a wide range of human vices, Holliday's analysis lacks precision and devolves into a collection of loosely related fortune cookies or platitudes. The advice is seen as repetitive and lacking in novel insights. Authorial critique. A more pointed criticism concerns the author's own perceived ego. Some reviewers find it ironic that a book warning against self-importance begins with the author detailing his own impressive career trajectory, leading to accusations that the work is an endless humble brag or a pep talk he is giving himself in the mirror. Applicability critique. Perhaps the most substantive critique is that the book's advice is aimed at a narrow, privileged audience and is tone-deaf to systemic realities. The admonition to work hard, don't let your ego think you're hot shit, has been interpreted by some as a perfect book for wage slavery, ignoring structural barriers to advancement. The Canvas strategy, for example, which advises helping superiors to get ahead, presumes a meritocratic environment in which such work is recognized and rewarded, a reality not afforded to everyone, particularly women and minorities, who are often expected to perform uncredited office housework. Critics have noted a determined lack of awareness of how racialized and gendered the message was, pointing out that advice that works for a white man may be ineffective or even detrimental for others. Ego in the modern arena, applying the lens. The utility of Holliday's framework can be tested by applying it to contemporary public figures whose careers are often analyzed through the lens of ego. Donald Trump. Holliday himself cites Trump as a prime example of ego making a difficult job even harder. Trump's public statements, "Show me someone without an ego, and I'll show you a loser," and his focus on winning, personal slights, and total recognition align perfectly with Holliday's definition of the enemy. His career can be seen as a case study of how an ego-driven need for admiration and an inability to accept loss can shape decision-making. Elon Musk. Elon Musk presents a more complex case. His ambition is world-changing, yet his public persona is often marked by ego-driven conflicts, a preference for yes-men, and an unwillingness to accept criticism that some analysts argue is becoming a liability for his companies. His public spats and impulsive decisions are behaviors Holliday's framework would identify as the enemy of sober, strategic leadership. Kanye West. Kanye West's career is a study in the duality of creative ambition and self-aggrandizing ego. His artistic output is often fueled by a profound self-belief, yet his public life has been marked by ego-driven diatribes and conflicts that have at times overshadowed his work. He embodies the thin line between the confidence needed to create and the ego that can destroy. These examples demonstrate that while the book's advice may be simplistic, its central lens, viewing actions through the motivation of a fragile, self-important ego, remains a powerful and relevant tool for interpreting behavior in the modern public square. Conclusion: the lifelong campaign against the enemy within. Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy stands as a significant work in the landscape of modern self-help literature, primarily for its successful synthesis of ancient philosophy and contemporary ambition. The book's central argument, that an unhealthy belief in our own importance is the primary obstacle to meaningful achievement and resilience, is a powerful and resonant message in an age of curated self-presentation. By structuring his analysis around the universal life cycle of aspire, success, and failure, Holliday provides a framework that feels perpetually relevant, offering guidance for every stage of a personal or professional journey. The ultimate value in the book lies not in its intellectual originality or its philosophical depth, but in its remarkable accessibility. Holliday translates the often esoteric principles of Stoicism into a simple, compelling narrative with a single identifiable antagonist, the ego. This simplification is the key to its popular appeal and its life-changing impact on many readers. It provides a clear, actionable target for self-improvement, empowering individuals to believe they can conquer their inner demons through conscious effort. This very strength, however, is also the source of its most valid criticisms. The book's narrative power is achieved through a degree of oversimplification. By bundling a host of complex human vices into the single category of ego, it sacrifices nuance for clarity, leading to advice that can feel platitudinous. Furthermore, its individualistic focus, a hallmark of both Stoicism and the self-help genre, largely ignores the systemic and structural barriers that shape individual realities, rendering some of its advice impractical or even naive for those not operating from a position of privilege. It is a manual for winning an internal battle, but it pays little attention to the external battlefield, where many of life's most significant struggles are waged. In the final analysis, Ego is the Enemy offers a compelling and valuable provocation. It forces a confrontation with the self, questioning the motives behind our ambitions and the stories we tell about our successes and failures. Its enduring message is that the management of ego is not a singular event, but a continuous, lifelong campaign. The battle against the enemy within is never definitively won. It is a discipline that must be practiced daily through the cultivation of humility, self-awareness, purpose, and resilience. For the reader willing to engage with this challenge, the book serves as a timeless reminder that true greatness is often found not in the inflation of the self, but in its sober and diligent mastery.
So, the key takeaway from Ego is the Enemy is that fighting the ego isn't a battle you win just once. It's a daily discipline you practice at every stage of your life. You have to be humble in your aspirations, gracious in your success, and resilient in your failure. Always remember, the goal of the book isn't to puff yourself up, but the opposite. It's to think less of yourself so that you can be free to accomplish the great work you've set out to do. Mastering your ego is what truly sets you free. And my question for you today is, in which stage do you feel your ego is your most dangerous enemy? In the stage of aspiration, success, or failure? Share your answers in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep analysis, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you'll always get the latest on life-changing books. Thanks so much for watching.